past week in Kelowna, which ended up being a little bit of heaven and a little bit of hell for me. It was heaven because it was an absolutely gorgeous setting. Okay, I know I keep showing you like the scenes from my different hotel rooms, but this was my view from my hotel room at the conference. Not too bad, hey? Not too shabby. And then the conference itself was filled with really, really wonderful people I love and lots of deep and meaningful and really introspective processes and conversations. And they gave us lots of free time so I could sit on my beautiful balcony and gaze at the view and think about the things that I learned. It was my kind of a retreat. I just loved it. And it was also a little bit of hell. Because the very first night, I broke a tooth. And I had to spend a lot of time and energy tending to that, including finding an emergency dentist in a town that I don't live in. So as I was contemplating this week, because I usually post my talks on the Wednesday before the Sunday, and I was still gone on Wednesday, and I was like, so what is it that I want to talk about today? And I came up with heaven or hell, you decide, because that was exactly the situation that I was in. I could be in heaven, absolutely, for having this rich experience. Reverend Leslie was with me. She can tell you it was just this wonderful, rich, meaningful experience at the conference. Or I could be in hell as I contemplated the extremely inconvenient, uncomfortable, and expensive experience of a broken tooth. But the real clincher here, and the point of my talk, is the last part of that, and that is you decide. Heaven or hell, you decide. Because at every moment of every day, we are at choice. Am I going to be in heaven or am I going to be in hell? And whichever one we choose, that is what we are going to experience. Because heaven and hell are not places. They are not locations. They are states of mind. Yes? Yes. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, had a lot to say about this topic. You might be surprised, but he did. In fact, he said this. Do you like that picture, first of all? Isn't that a fun heaven and hell picture? Yeah. He said this, of course, heaven is not a place, and hell is not a place. They are states of consciousness. We may be either in heaven or hell right here, and we may travel back and forth between heaven and hell as our consciousness harmonizes with our environment or is in conflict with it. Everybody go like this. Ooh. There's a lot to unpack in that quote. Now, as I said about my experience this past week, I vacillated, trust me, between being in harmony with my environment. Oh, I was just so good. Everything was wonderful. It felt like heaven. And I also spent a fair amount of my time out of harmony with what I know to be truth. And what is true is that I live in an abundant and orderly and harmonious universe. But I wasn't there, and I wasn't believing that at the time because I was worrying and gnawing on all the implications of a broken tooth. So in those moments, I was basically living in a form of hell. And at each instance, whether I was in heaven or whether I was in hell, I was making a choice. And I was experiencing that choice. For example, I have a couple of examples from this. The first evening First evening was so wonderful. 125 ministers gathered together, and we were having good conversations, and we were going deep, and I was enjoying every moment of it, and I knew I had that view to go back to also. I was enjoying every moment of it, and then I went to my room, and I had a little snack, and I chomped down the wrong way, and I could just tell something was not right. Back here, right back there. Yeah. My total Zen mood completely disappeared as I thought, oh, hell. So the next morning, I made an emergency dentist appointment, and the next morning, I still went down to the session, and I was in a totally different frame of mind. Instead of loving everybody and loving everything, I was irritated and cranky at all the whiners. I broke my tooth. Now, it didn't feel great, but it didn't feel horrible. It was uncomfortable, but I allowed a broken tooth to color my attitude and my experience. I mean, it was the same group of people still talking about things that mattered, and then I found fault with everyone and everything. So I went from transcendent heaven the night before to snarky hell the next morning. I went from being in harmony with my environment to being out of harmony with my environment, and it was my choice. My heaven, my hell. Now, I realize in the big scheme of things, my situation of having a broken tooth is not that big a deal. If anything, it's a mini hell. It's like a hellette. It's inconvenient. It's an expense. It's kind of uncomfortable. But I am aware that there are those of you who are dealing with some really serious situations in your life. Serious hells, health issues, family stuff, money challenges, employment stuff. I get that. And because they seem really, really big, it can feel as if you're in a type of hell that you will never find your way out of. So hearing me whine about a broken tooth might set your teeth on edge. I actually have that written, like joke. And yet, when you're in it, whether it's a broken tooth or it's a job loss or it's a health challenge, understanding that you are at choice as to how you are going to be in this situation can bring you some relief. You understand what I'm saying? Even when you're in it, understanding that you have a choice can bring you some relief. Because when we understand that we get to decide how we are going to respond and react to everything, we have freedom then. We understand it becomes our choice, even if we don't think that we do. And here's the beauty of it. We may decide to stay in hell, and that's okay. I am the queen of wallowing for a while. But the difference is, even when I'm wallowing, I know that I'm choosing to wallow. I'm choosing to wallow, and eventually I get tired of it, and then I go do something else. But we can also decide, rather than stay in hell, we can decide to focus on heaven. And what happens is that opens us up to the possibility of new ideas and new situations and new opportunities and new solutions to come in when we are open to something new. Because that is the basis of our teaching. And that is that we experience what we think about, what we expect, and what we accept. We experience what we think about, what we expect. I knew that was going to happen. And what we accept. You with me? So when we expect and accept that life is going to be a series of hells, and that is what we attract, that's what we experience, it is self-perpetuating. And the opposite is also true. when we expect and accept that life is for us in spite of a hellish glitch that happens to happen, that's what we experience in the world. Here's how Emerson put it. He said, to different minds, the same world is a hell and a heaven. To different minds, the same world is a hell and a heaven. As I said, the Science of Mind in Ernest Holmes, he teaches that there is no this place called hell. There is no this place called heaven. In fact, he said this: there is no devil, no hell, no torment, nor damnation outside of one's own state of thought. OMG! No punishment outside of that self-inflicted through ignorance. OMG too. And no salvation outside of conscious cooperation with the infinite. OMG squared. Heaven and hell are states of consciousness. So what this tells us is that the concepts of heaven and hell, of evil and good, of damnation and salvation are actually teaching us the law of cause and effect. What he says here, no punishment outside of that self-inflicted through ignorance. When we are ignorant of our own spiritual perfection, when we are ignorant of, when we don't know what we don't know, we draw in things to us. So the law of cause and effect is what you think about, what you give out, what you believe is what you experience. What goes around comes around. Heaven or hell. Is this making sense? Are you guys with me? Okay. Whew. So where did this concept come from? Where did this concept of heaven and hell come from? As with most ancient beliefs that become part of our culture, it originally stemmed from people trying to make sense of things that didn't make sense. In other words, to explain the unexplainable, including where do people go when they die? That's like a biggie. One minute they're there, the next minute. Imagine 10,000 years ago when they had absolutely no idea about anything. The person is alive and then they're dead. So most ancient cultures had some sort of a concept that good people went up someplace to the good place and bad people went down someplace to the bad place. So there wasn't named anything, it just was. It was like, okay, this separation. And then came religion. Now, we were raised, most of us, in the Judeo-Christian background, so that I'm going to talk mostly about that aspect. Eastern pagan religions also have their belief about the afterlife and everything, but I'm not as familiar. But I do want to share this one thing with you. The root word for religion in Latin is religare, which means to bind. Now, in ancient times, religion kept people a sense of safety and community and understanding. So binding together in that way, that's good, right? We even like a sense of community, and we're not even a religion. So people kind of like that. But what happened is, in time, that being bound right by religion became a means of controlling people. And one of the ways to control people is to literally put the fear of God and damnation into their hearts. So they, whoever they is, they all look like Moses, right? They invented some pissed off guy in the sky that was watching everything and was meting out punishment to anybody who sinned. And the sins had to do with what they considered to be sins. You know, they didn't want us to have fun. So anything that had anything at all to do with having fun was considered a sin. Am I right? our human nature. Said enough. So then they got the pissed off guy up in the sky. Get over it, it's just a word. We're talking about hell after all. They got this pissed off guy in the sky who's punishing us for our sins. And then they made up a place where people would go when they died, and they would be tortured for all of eternity. And you know what? It worked. It worked. People were terrified to do anything wrong, and so they subsequently towed the line. Now, there were a number of names for this torturous afterlife place, including Hades, Tartarus, Sheol, Jahannam. Those were some of the names if you look in the ancient scriptures. In Judaism, which was the original of the Abrahamic religions that included Christianity and Islam, there was an actual physical place called Gehenna that was the valley of Hinnom's son. Trust me, this is all going to make sense in a second. So Gehenna, remember that word, right? Originally, it was an actual physical place, this valley that stretched from Mount Zion to something else, and it was a garbage dump where fires were kept burning to keep down the stench. You with me? It was also the place where bodies of convicted criminals and individuals who were denied a proper burial would be dumped. So this is an actual physical place, fire, stink, dead bodies. And the word Gehenna is translated in the Bible to, you guessed it, hell. That's where it came from. So when you tell someone to go to hell, you're in essence sending them to a stinky garbage pit, not to eternal damnation. In my research on this topic, excuse me, I found this really fun quote from Ernest Holmes. I mean, Ernest seems so serious, right? This is a funny quote that he said about it. He said, "When I lost hell, I lost the greatest asset I had. There is nowhere to send people who disagree with me. And this is bad. I miss it more than any of my infantile possessions, but I couldn't carry it along into adulthood because the place cooled off a long time ago." So if hell isn't a place where people go, then what is it? What is it? Well, as we already learned, it's a state of consciousness. It's a paradigm. It's a worldview. And how it shows up in our lives these days are with things like this: crisis, catastrophe, dilemma, trouble, difficulty, upheaval, chaos, disorder, confusion, depression, adversity, meltdown. Those are just a few words. Meltdown? Oh. Now, when we look at these words, don't pay no attention to the people in the back of the room. When we look at these words, what do they have in common? What do they have in common? To my mind, they are all the result of being out of harmony with our true selves, either by choice or by circumstance. These things happen when we believe in something other than an orderly and harmonious universe. Now, I realize that may sound kind of Pollyanna, and just believe in good and everything will be perfect. Well, in theory, that's really nice, but in reality, I know that life gets out of harmony and it gets disorderly. It happens to me on a regular basis. So what I'm saying is that when we believe that there is an orderly and harmonious universe, even if we are not experiencing it at the time, then we can choose to see the challenges that we are experiencing as still part of an orderly and harmonious universe. So we can see those things and go, okay, this is not making sense to me right now, but I know that I live in an orderly and harmonious universe, and so this will make sense to me at some time, if we choose to see it that way. Because the universe is not only orderly and harmonious, it is also impartial. So either way that you choose, whether you choose crisis and opportunity, dilemma or puzzle, or upheaval or clearing out, or confusion or clarity, you are going to experience what you choose. For example, I don't know how long my tooth was cracked and ready to break. I don't know, it could have happened any time, right? And it broke while I was on a trip, a really pleasant trip that I was enjoying. So that was a bummer. However, harmonious and orderly universe. I paid for it with my WestJet MasterCard. And my WestJet MasterCard has travel medical insurance with it. So it turns out that at least a portion of fixing my tooth is going to be paid for by my credit card. If it had happened here in Calgary, here at home, I'd have been footing the whole bill myself. So again, the question is, heaven or hell? I get to decide. And I decided that next week, because we talked about hell this week, next week for Thanksgiving, we're going to talk about heaven. How's that sound? I love you, and so it is.